I have 54 minutes on my phone. Right. I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Oh my god, Ivan, your book has you have such deep worlding. Yeah, man. That's why Last of Us is the best story in Lord of the Rings. Evildeus is a great grandfather, obviously, of what? From what? From 9 generations. 9 generations. It's either 9 or 10 generations. I don't remember, man. 9 generations of what? Of Ephesus, obviously, right? Right. So that's the royal bloodline for the bats, obviously. I don't mention that much information about the bats, but the only information you get about the bats is Evildeus. That's it. Whereas the wolves and humans I mentioned more details in the book, obviously. So that's the royal bloodline for what? For the bats, obviously. So Evildeus is also an ancestor, obviously. Ancestor of the South, don't forget that. So he's a devil being, obviously. He's a great grandfather from 9 generations of Ephesus. Ephesus is what, the 10th? He's a great grandfather of what, the 10th generation, obviously. Well, Ephesus is the 9th generation. Right? That's the royal bloodline. So Evildeus is a great grandfather from 9 generations ago, 1,000 years, right? 900 years, right? 900 years and 9 generations of what? The royal bloodline, obviously. And last but not least, Arioch. Sorry, Rakai. Right. Rakai, Arioch are what? The great. This is what? 9 generations. 9 generations for Aratat, 10 generations for Fool, obviously. 9 generations. They're what? Aratats. They're the great, right? Grandfathers, obviously. From 9 generations ago, obviously, of Aratats, who was born 9 generations later. Later, obviously. I'll say later here. 10 generations later, right? 9 generations later. And 9 generations later, obviously. Right? So, Rakai and Arioch are the great grandfathers, obviously, 9 generations ago of Aratat, who was born 9 generations later, and for Fool, born 10 generations later. So I hope you get the idea of what? Of the bloodline, of the royal bloodline. Right? So there is what? There is a deep past, obviously. There is a deep past between the species, obviously. Yeah, between the species. You'll find out what I mean by that when you read the book, and hence why I like Volume 2 the best. Because Volume 2 is when you get the unexpected climaxes, obviously. There is a deep past between what? Between the species, obviously, right? Humans, bats, and wolves, and massive wolves, right? That's what they're called. So I hope you guys get an idea what I'm talking about. So you have the ants. These guys are all ancestors, obviously. That's all I'm gonna say. I don't want to spoil the story for you. Just remember that the ancestors in the south are cursed and they're devils, and the ancestors in the north are holy, obviously. And the north is holy and the south is cursed. So all I'm gonna say is I don't want to ruin the story for you. So you have the ancestors. So Sundus is a great grandfather 9 generations ago of Takis the first, who was born 9 generations later, and Takis the second, who was born 10 generations later. And that's the royal bloodline for the humans, obviously. Evildeus is an ancestor. He's a great grandfather, right? He's a great grandfather 9 generations ago, obviously. Right? Generations ago of Ephesus, who was born 9 generations later, and that's the royal bloodline for the bats. Rakai and Arioch are the ancestors too. They're the great grandfathers 9 generations ago of Aratat, who was born 9 generations later, and from Fool, who was born 10 generations later, and that's the royal bloodline. And there's a deep past between species, humans, bats, and massholes. I don't want to ruin the story for you. You'll find out even that when you read the book. Obviously. Right? And that's why Last of Us will be the best story we told. You're looking at what? You're looking at something better than Lord of the Rings. That's how what? That's how top notch. That's all. Am I missing anything? That's oh my god, Ivan, you missed out so many things. Yeah, there's so much detail in my book that I didn't have time to mention everything in my last video. But you guys are obviously enjoying this video more because you can see the words well, obviously. Whereas in my last video you couldn't see the words well, right? What else is there to talk about in my last Hosea story? Right? There's a lot of things I can talk about from my book because my book is so detailed. Oh yeah, I'm gonna keep saying this. The South has what? A different atmosphere. I don't know if I'm spelling atmosphere. I might be spelling it wrong. Has a different atmosphere than the North. You have to remember that. The South has a different atmosphere than the North. The wild animals in the South are even cursed, men. Are cursed. You have the wild snakes, obviously, right? The wild crows. Wild ravens. So you have Eretaz crows who talk, and you also have the wild animals. You have the wild snakes. You have the wild crows. You have the wild ravens who can kill people, obviously, right? You even have wild stags, obviously, who are deformed. Wild stags, obviously, right? Who are deformed, who have deformed faces because the South is cursed. Remember that the South is cursed, obviously. Right? Right? The South is cursed. So let me read what I said. So the South has a different atmosphere than the North. The wild animals in the South are cursed. The wild snakes, wild crows, wild ravens, wild stags are deformed, and the South is cursed, obviously. So the wild snakes, wild crows, wild ravens, wild stags, they can kill humans, and they're all cursed because the South is cursed, obviously. I'll talk about population. The population I'll talk about the army first, obviously. Right? So what? You have what? So for the wolf army, I'll do this. So Eretat's army, obviously. What? Eretat's army and Morale's army. Because Morale's a general. Morale's the general of the army, obviously, right? So it's Morale's army also, but it's Eretat's army. Eretat has what? He has a 25,000 wolf army. Obviously. Right? Tachys' army, obviously. Tachys' army. Obviously, but Cassius is a general, so I'm going to do this. Cassius is a general of the army, obviously. Because Tachys is prince, is his army too, obviously. Just like Eretat has his army, but Morale's a general of the army, but it's still Eretat's army because he's a king. Whereas Tachys is a prince of the north, so even though it's Cassius' army and he's a general, Tachys has his own army, obviously. And Meramis also has his own army, obviously. Meramis is a captain of the archers. Right. So Tachys has what? He has a 12 what? 12,500 army. And what? A 25. I'm bad at math, guys. Forgive me. And a 3,500, right? A 3,500 archer army, obviously. Archer army. And Meramis is the captain of the archers, obviously, right? He has this. So Eretat's army, or Morale's a general. So Eretat's army, and Morale's a general, obviously. He has a 25,000 wolf army. Tachys' army, or Cassius' army, whatever. And Meramis' archer army. Tachys has a 2,500 army, who are the melees, obviously. And these are the archers. So the melees, there's 2,500 men in the army, and there's 3,500 archers. What? 3,500 archers. Is it 35? 15,000. My math would be off. 15,000 subtract what? Yeah, 3,500, right? if my math is right. 3,500 army. Yeah, 3,500 army is Maramis' archers. So there's 3,500 archers, and Maramis is the captain of the archers, obviously. And there's 2,500, and there's 2,500, 2,500 melees in the Zanian army. They're known as what, the Zanian army, obviously, right? There's also 700 what? Blacksmiths. Ivan, what do you mean by blacksmiths? Cornelius' men, right? Cornelius' men. Ivan, what do you mean by that? I thought they're cells that can't fight. Again, you'll find out what I mean by that when you read the book. I don't want to spoil the story for you. Cornelius' men. 700 of them, obviously. Right? And then you have what? 2,500 wolf army. They're just melees. Obviously. There's no archers in the wolf army. So melees, swords, spikes, and axes, obviously, right? Right? So that pretty much says army. So Takis' army, or Cassius' army, 2,500 melee army, obviously, and then 3,400 archers for what? For Maramis' men. And they're known as the Zanian army, and there's 700. You also have 700 blacksmiths who are Cornelius' men, and I don't want to spoil the story. You also have what? You have Eli. They fight, obviously. You have Papari, you have Cornelius, you have Job, you have Sirius. They also fight, obviously. They fight, obviously. But they're not trained in the arts. You'll find what I mean with that when you read the book. They're not trained in the arts. Okay? I'm going to keep saying that because they're Southerners, obviously. You have to remember that. When you read the book, remember that these guys are all what? They're all Southerns. They're not trained in the arts. Whereas the Northerns are trained in the arts, obviously. Right? That pretty much sums it up for the army, obviously, right? Oh, Ivan, your book is so detailed. Yeah, man, my world building for my book is amazing. It's not as good as Lord of the Rings, but I have amazing world building, obviously. And that's why I have so much characters and so much detail. I have so much in-depth detail about what? About my story, obviously. For my story. 12 minutes here. I'll try and mess the Babylon for 54 minutes. I'll try my best here, okay? There's so much to talk about. Right? I'll do this. Right? Tactius is handsome, obviously, right? Lithia is beautiful. You'll see what I mean by that when you read the book, obviously. Right? She is known. I won't kill the story for you. She is beautiful, obviously. Lithius envies her. And she's a northern, obviously. Because the northerns don't like the southerns, obviously, right? So Takis is handsome, Lithia is beautiful, Lithius envies her, obviously. Papari is antsy. He's antsy, obviously. But he's like, wow, you know what I'm saying? Takis, he's just antsy, obviously. Antsy. Sirius is grumpy. Right? Job is a pothead. He's not too bright, obviously, right? Right? Now, I don't want to spoil the story for you. Belle is weird, obviously, right? Belle is weird, obviously. Mary is curious and crazy, obviously. Right? That pretty much sums up I don't want to spoil too much of the story for you, but this pretty much sums up some of the characteristics. Takis is handsome. He's also arrogant, obviously. Right? Lithia is beautiful. She's a sweetheart. Obviously. Lithius envies her, obviously. You'll see what I mean by that. Papari's antsy. Sirius is grumpy. Job is a pothead and is not too bright. Belle is weird. Mary is curious and crazy, obviously. That's all I'm going to say. I don't want to spoil the story for you. Oh yeah, I forgot to mention this. Who is... You also have what? You have Suzanne. You have Suzanne and what? Suzanne and Hive, obviously, right? I forgot to mention you so. Who is Suzanne? Right? She is the mother of Job, obviously, right? Right? She is the mother of Job. Again, she's only mentioned in the book. She's a very minor character. These are all very minor characters, obviously. She's very minor. But you'll find out some history with Job, with what? His parents, obviously. So she's the mother of Job, obviously, right? And the husband of Hive. The wife of Hive. The wife of Hive. Right? She is a Sapphian, obviously, right? Again, sometimes I spell Sapphians with a U and sometimes I spell it with an A. So you might, if you see any misspelling, it's because I spelled it different, obviously. She's a Sapphian, obviously. That's all I'm going to say. Right? Who is Hive? Right? He is the father of Job. Right? He is the husband of Suzanne. He is a Sapphian, obviously, right? That's all I'm going to say. So who is Hive? He is the father of Job. He is the husband of Suzanne, and he is a Sapphian, obviously. And hence why you have history with Job. You have some history with Job, obviously, right? You have some history with Job, Papyri. I'll just do this. You have some history with Job, obviously, with his parents, obviously. You'll find out what I mean with that when you read the end of Volume 2, obviously. So you'll get history. You have some history, obviously. With what? The Papyri in the book, obviously. Papyri, Job, Tacitus. Papyri, Job, Tacitus. Obviously, Tactius, obviously. You have history with Tactius, obviously. Papyri, Job, Tacitus, Cassius. Yeah. And Cornelius. You have history with all these guys in the book, obviously. I give you a little history with all these characters. Okay? Right? So you have some history with Papyri, Job, and Sirius too. I forgot Sirius. Sirius too, obviously. Sirius has some history too. So you have some history with Papyri, Job, Tacitus, Tactius, Cassius, Cornelius, and Sirius. You have history with all these characters. Some history. I'll say some. Some history with all these characters in the book. And hence why for Zanus, I can easily write side stories. I can also write prequels because there's so much history in the book, which I'm not going to do, obviously. After Zanus, I'm retiring as an author, man. I'm just going to act in movies with my wife, and that's it. Yeah. 18 minutes. Right? I'm going to keep saying this. Hence why Last Hope for Zanus if done right, and a lot of money were put into it, you are looking at one of, if not the best story ever told in motion picture. You'll find one that read the book, man. I'm not kidding around. Yes, even better than Lord of the Rings, man. Yes, even better than Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings. That's how good Zanus is. I'm not kidding around. Hence why Last Hope for Zanus, if done right, and a lot of money will put into it. If you put 200 million, 100 million towards Zanus, will flop. You have to put unheard amount of money into it, almost $1 billion. $1 billion. You put unheard amount of money into it for world building, action sequences, horror, obviously. Hire good Hollywood actors, the perfect Hollywood actors, right? Train them in dialect speech too, because they speak Old English, obviously. Hence why Last Hope for Zanus, if done right, and a lot of money will put into it, you're looking at one of, if not the best story ever told in motion picture. Yes, even better than Peter Jackson's Lord of the Rings. That's how good Zanus is. And you guys, I gave you guys an in-depth detail with my book. You guys, I think you guys now understand why my Last Hope for Zanus story, if adapted to the big screen, will be the best, one of the best, one of, if not the best story ever told in motion picture. Obviously. Right? I'll say this. The characters for Last Hope for Zanus, obviously, for Zanus, speak in Old English, obviously, right? They speak in Old English, obviously. So the characters for Last Hope for Zanus, they speak in Old English. Aratet doesn't really speak in Old English, but the characters, the human characters, I'll say, the human characters for Last Hope for Zanus speak in Old English. Hence why I have to what? Hire a dialect coach, right? I have to what? To hire a dialect coach. For my what? My Last Hope for Zanus movie, right? Right? Hence why I have to hire a dialect coach for what? For my Last Hope for Zanus movie, because they speak in Old English in the book, obviously. You'll see what I mean by that when you read the book. I add in some modern English in the book, obviously, but it's mainly Old English. They speak in Old English. If you read the book, Tactius, Tacitonius, and all them, they all speak in Old English. Hence, I need to hire a dialect coach for my Last Hope for Zanus movie. That way, what? The actors are well trained, obviously, and they look like what? They look like... The Northerns and Southerns don't have different dialects. They all speak the same, but they all speak in Old English in the book when you read it, obviously. Just like in Lord of the Rings... In Lord of the Rings, what? Elijah Wood has an accent. He speaks in Old English in the book, in the movie, because what? If Elijah Wood spoke in what? In modern English, the movie wouldn't be that good. You have to have him speak in Old English, obviously. And for my movie, I have to hire a dialect coach to train me, my wife, and all the actors in Old English speech. Because they all speak in Old English in the book, obviously. Right? I'll say this. Let's talk about wealth here in my book. What? Wealth. Wealth. So I'll say this. So Tactius, right? Tactius the first, Tactius second, obviously. Let's do the rich, the poor, obviously, right? So Tactius the first, Tactius the second, Tacitonius, right? Maramis. Well, Maramis isn't really known as being rich, but he lives with Tactius in the castle though. He's a northern, so he's rich though. Tactius the first, Tactius second, Tacitonius, Maramis, Baramis, right? Lithius, Sarah, Anne, Labia. Who else am I missing? Right? I'm not going to mention Furiel and Zilla because they're not in the book. They're just mentioned in the book. So I'm not going to mention those guys. So Tactius first, Tactius second, Tacitonius, Maramis, Baramis, Lithia, Sarah, and Labia. They're what? They're all rich, obviously. And they're all Northerns. The Northerns are pretty much rich people, obviously. Right? Lithia, I'll do this. Southern, the rich, obviously. Right? So Lithia, Eli, right? Cornelius, obviously. Even Job. Job is rich too, because Job was Eli's hired caretaker, so he's rich too, obviously. Job, Elizabeth, obviously, right? Belle, Mary, they're rich, but they're Southerners, so they're not as rich, obviously. They're not as rich as the Northerns, right? So even though Lithia, Eli, Cornelius, Job, and Elizabeth, Belle, and Mary, they're all fucking rich, obviously. They're not as rich as the Northerns because the Northerns are richer than Southerners. So Eli is the richest man in the South. He owns a big house. He has his own banquet hall with 100 guests. You'll find out what I mean by that when in the Lithia chapter, when Takis meets Lithia, obviously, and Sears and Papyri, obviously. They meet Belle and Mary and all them. You'll find out how rich Eli is. Eli is fucking rich, obviously. Cornelius is his right-hand man. He's rich. He's the head of the blacksmiths, obviously. Lithia is his daughter, so she's spoiled. And Belle and Mary live with Lithia, and they're also spoiled, obviously. Elizabeth is Eli's wife, and Job is Eli's hired caretaker. And so they're all rich, but they're not as rich as the Northerners. You have to remember that. Whereas Sirius and Papyri are poor compared to them. They're poor people, obviously. Sirius and Papyri are poor because they're farmers, right? They're not poor, but compared to what? Compared to Tacius and Lithian, all of them, they're poor. They're poor people. That's my point. They're not poor. Like, they have a house, they have a home office. You'll find what I mean by that in the 22 Years Later chapter. Right? The 22 Years Later chapter. You'll find what I mean by that when Tacius meets Papyri and Sirius. They're not poor. Like, they what? They live in a house. They have a home, but compared to Lithia, Eli, Cornelius, and all of them, the Southerns and Sapphius, and the Northerns and Zanians, they're poor. That's my point. Compared to Tacius, Papyri and Sirius are poor. Compared to Lithia and Eli, they're poor people, obviously, because they're farmers, obviously. Whereas Lithia, Eli, Cornelius, Job, Elizabeth, Belle, Mary, they're all rich in the South, obviously. They're rich people in the South. Tacius the first, Tacius the second, Tacitonius, Meramis, Baramis, Lithius, Sarah, and Labia, they're all rich because they're Northerns. They're part of the royal line. Obviously, where Sirius and Papyri are poor compared to those two groups of people, obviously. I thought it was cool to explain the wealth, right? The ranking of wealth in my book, obviously. Because Eli is really, really rich, but compared to Tacius, his wealth is small, obviously. His wealth is not small, but compared to Tacius, he's not as rich as Tacius, obviously. Because Tacius is the Prince of Zanus. He owns his own castle, luxury castle. Eli has this huge house, but Tacius owns his own castle, and he's a prince of the north. He's fucking spoiled. And in the movie, you're gonna see Tacius wearing nice robes. You're gonna see Tacitonius wearing nice robes because they're all spoiled rich, obviously, right? I'm gonna keep saying this. The Northerns, I already mentioned this in my past video. The Northerns do not like the Southerns. The Southerns, obviously. The Southerns do not like the Northerns. Goes both ways, right? Right? So the Northerns, right, look down on the Southerns. Right? They have no respect for them. You'll find what I mean by that when you read the book with Tacitonius, when he meets Job and all stuff, and in the end of Volume 2. The Northerns look down on the Southerns. They have no respect for them. Right? You'll see what I mean by that with Tacius, Tacitonius, and Cassius when they meet Job and all stuff. You'll find what I mean with that. It's actually funny. They have no respect for them, obviously. Right? The Southerns, right? The Southerns are what? The Southerns are what? In awe of the Northerns, obviously. So when they see a Northern, they're like, oh my god, a Northern's here. You know what I'm saying? The Southerns are in awe of the Northerns because what? Because the Northerns are what? Are of high status, obviously, right? High status, wealth, you know what I'm saying? Position, right? Every Southern, I'll end it here actually. I'll end what I'm talking about here. So I'm going to say this. So the Northerns do not like the Southerns. I'll shut my camera for a sec.